What historical fact makes you cry? This soldier, I realized, must have had friends at home and in his regiment, yet he lay there deserted by all except his dog. I looked on, unmoved, at battles which decided the future of nations. Tearless, I had given orders which brought death to thousands. Yet here I was stirred, profoundly stirred to tears. And by what? By the grief of one dog. That even babies weren't spared during the Nanking Massacre. RMS Carpathia was the first ship to arrive on the scene when the Titanic hit an iceberg and sank. Every one of the Titanic's 705 survivors were rescued by Carpathia, which made a tremendously heroic effort that night in the North Atlantic. The scene is dramatized in A Night to Remember, the classic film from 1958, and one of the more accurate, especially given the constraints of technology at that time. Harold Cottam, the radio operator on Carpathia, had already gone off duty when the Titanic's distress signals were received. He immediately conveyed the message to Captain Arthur Rostron, who jumped out of bed and ordered the ship to change course. Then there was the Californian. They were only 5 miles or so from the Titanic and had spotted her in the night. Unfortunately, the radio operator had gone to bed and nobody was able to hear the Titanic's distress call. The Titanic tried to get the attention of Californian by firing rockets, but Californian's captain didn't think they were a distress signal. The Californian left. Some reports say the Californian was much farther away, and it and Titanic didn't spot each other, but both spotted some other mystery ship between them that still hasn't been identified. The story of Joe Ridey. Joe was tested and found to have an IQ of 46, and the mind of a 6-year-old. Despite this, Joe Ridey was executed at the age of 23 by the state of Colorado. In addition, Joe was innocent of the crime for which he was convicted and the victim of a coerced confession. Joe's mental challenges were so significant that he didn't even understand he was about to die as they walked him to the gas chamber. While held on death row during the appeals process, Ridey often played with a toy train, 9, given to him by prison warden Roy Best. The warden said that Ridey was the happiest prisoner on death row. 7. He was liked by both the prisoners and guards. Best became one of Ridey's supporters and joined the effort to save his life. 6. He said of Ridey before his execution, he probably didn't even know he was about to die. All he did was happily sit and play with a toy train I had given him. For his last meal, Ridey requested ice cream. When questioned about his impending execution, he showed blank bewilderment. 7. He did not understand the meaning of the gas chamber, telling the warden no, Joe won't die. 10. He was reported to have smiled while being taken to the gas chamber. Momentarily nervous, he calmed down when the warden grabbed his hand and reassured him, "Whenever I think about him smiling and walking to his death, it makes me fucking ill." And deeply ashamed of the system of governance that allowed it to happen, even 80 years. Most if not all the astronauts aboard the Challenger survived the explosion. It was the crash into the water that would have killed them. I was going to mention this too, except in the context that it never should have happened. The night before the launch, NASA talked with Morton Thiokol engineers. They made the solid rocket boosters. The engineers were very concerned about the weather conditions. The lowest temperature the shuttle had ever launched in was 54 degrees Fahrenheit. The conversation turned around to, "Can you prove there will be problems if we launch?" And engineers had to say no, there was no proof there definitely would be problems. So they proceeded with the launch. The melted O-ring made a temporary seal, which held for about 40 to 50 seconds. If there hadn't been a strong wind shear aloft that broke the seal loose, there's a chance they might have made it to space. The worst part is that the solid rocket boosters had a history of O-ring blow-by. This was not the first time O-rings did not seal correctly. It was the first time it completely failed. NASA knew of the problem, but they didn't prioritize trying to fix it. NASA put politics and money in front of human safety. It was the first time 13-year-old me saw it. I believed what I'd read, that NASA always put human safety first. It utterly shattered my view of them. When Columbia broke up on re-entry, I wasn't surprised. Irish unmarried moms were sometimes required to live in institutions, raising their own babies until they were adopted. Imagine knowing how cute your kid was, taking care of it, knowing you couldn't keep it. Sometimes they were as old as 2 or 3 when adopted. The movie Philomena dealt with this topic. When Alexander Hamilton's eldest son died, his second child Angelica Hamilton had a mental breakdown and she never recovered. Sometimes, her family would walk into a room with only her in it, and she would be speaking to her dead brother. I used to be a care worker for elderly people, and we had a lady in our facility who used to have a twin sister. The lady had a husband and they wanted children, but she was infertile, whereas her sister could have kids but she never married. Her sister and husband were dead, with no kids. She was just alone, and she knew, but eventually dementia took this from her, and she would ask about her sister and husband all the time. One day I went in to give her her medication, and as I was in the kitchen I overheard her speaking to her husband and sister saying, "I know you're dead, but that's okay because you're here." She was lucid that evening, told me she knew she was hallucinating, but she kept talking to them anyway. Broke my heart. I miss her. Almost a quarter of Europe's military-aged males died in World War I. The total number of deaths includes from 9 to 11 million military personnel. The civilian death toll was about 6 to 13 million, the casualties in individual battles were insane. For example, 306,000 people died at the Battle of Verdun over the course of 1916. At the Battle of the Somme, almost 1 million were wounded or killed. The end of a Sappho poem. Beyond all hope, I prayed those timeless days we spent might be made twice as long. I prayed one word: I want someone, I tell you, will remember us, even in another time. That quote always make me tear up. World War I mercy dogs, they would go out into no man's land and find wounded soldiers. They would bring medical supplies for the soldiers to patch themselves up. Or if the soldier was too mortally wounded, stay and comfort them in their final moments. It's gotta be the story of the Halifax explosion on December 6, 1917. A ship with a cargo full of TNT caught fire when another ship accidentally hit it at low speed. It was enough to cause sparks, which ignited the benzol, which then caused the TNT to explode, and killed over 2,000 people. One of the rail workers, Patrick Coleman, went back to the station right before the explosion and sent a telegram saying, "Hold up the train. Ammunition ship afire in harbor making for Pier 6 and will explode. Guess this will be my last message. Goodbye, boys." He died along with many others. There's a beautiful shanty about it called Fire and Flame by the Longest Johns, which is very poignant and always makes me cry. Something about the sacrifice of Coleman and the sheer panic and tragedy breaks my heart. Let it be known that Patrick Coleman saved the lives of about 300 people aboard the trains by going back to the station and telling them to stop the trains. There were approximately 300 infants and children that were murdered in Jonestown, being forcibly fed or injected with cyanide. I feel so much pain for all the victims, but the kids in particular make me ache with despair. This story about Sir Nicholas Winton, who saved over 600 children from the Holocaust. No one knew of his story until 50 years later when his wife found notebooks detailing the 669 kids he helped escape the Nazis. During World War II, the Japanese army had comfort stations which served as prisons for women who were taken against their will. They would routinely form lines to take turn in raping and torturing the women trapped in these prison cells. This is just one of Japan's horrid actions during the war. Unit 731 and the Nanjing Massacre are other examples. Henry Gunther was an American soldier killed during World War I at 10:59 a.m. on November 11, 1918. 1 minute before the armistice took effect at 11 a.m., Gunther charged a German roadblock outfitted with machine guns. German soldiers tried waving him off, knowing the war would come to an end in mere moments. Apparently he got too close, fired a couple rounds, and was promptly shot and killed instantly. The Sand Creek Massacre is particularly bad. They had so much faith in the peace treaties that had been signed, the signs of good faith from American settlers, only to be massacred. The leader of the camp, Black Kettle, desperately holding up the American flag he'd been given with a white flag underneath it, encouraging his people to gather around it, thinking that the settlers would realize they were allies and stop the killings, only to be shot down. The descriptions of the massacre are brutal: children tortured and slaughtered, pregnant women with their children torn out of their stomachs, genitals torn from corpses and taken for trophies. It really made me realize you can never underestimate the cruelty of mankind. Especially considering most of the murdered in this massacre were defenseless women, children, and elderly. In World War II, an American pilot named Charles Brown was flying a B-17 in a bomb raid over Germany, where his aircraft was severely shot up and entered a free fall when Brown passed out. When Brown awoke, he was only a few thousand feet above the ground and barely was able to recover the aircraft. When the Luftwaffe spotted a limping B-17 far below the formation, they dispatched a pilot named Franz Stigler, a soon-to-be ace just 1 kill away, with 2 down B-17s earlier that day. As he approached from the rear, Stigler noticed that the B-17's tail gunner didn't move, and after further inspection, realized he and several other gunners were dead. Stigler saw this and remembered what his flight instructor had said years ago: "If you shoot a man in a parachute, they'll shoot you myself." Stigler saw this limping B-17 as no different from a downed pilot in a parachute. To prevent German flak cannons from taking it out, Stigler flew in formation with the B-17 all the way until the English Channel, where it landed safely. Stigler never mentioned the incident, and could have been court-martialed for it. Decades later, Charles went looking for the enemy pilot that saved his life that fateful day, and eventually met him face to face, becoming close friends and dying just a few months apart from each other in 2008. Anime Aquash, Native woman who was involved with the American Indian Movement, AIM, was shot in the back of the head execution style. The investigation around her murder was shady, and involved the FBI cutting off her hands with the premise that her corpse needed to be fingerprinted. I first learned about her in the first pages of Lakota Woman, a memoir by Mary Bravebird, who was one of her closest friends and who wrote about the murder and how the FBI cut off her hands. I have not been able to stop thinking about Annie's dismembered hands since I read it. Mary also wrote about the involuntary sterilization of Native women in her community, which was widespread through at least the 1970s. The disembodiment and disrespect of Native women haunts me and will haunt me for the rest of my life, especially as a woman and a Native descendant. Anne Frank's death at the age of 15, hiding from Nazis, had contracted typhus, couldn't recover from it and left her diary for us. Her last words from her diary. As I've told you many times, I'm split in two. One side contains my exuberant cheerfulness, my flippancy, my joy in life and, above all, my ability to appreciate the lighter side of things. By that I mean not finding anything wrong with flirtations, a kiss, an embrace, an off-color joke. This side of me is usually lying in wait to ambush the other one, which is much purer, deeper and finer. The Story of Alex, 1977 to 2007, an African gray parrot who learned to speak, recognize objects and play with his owner. It was one of the smartest parrots ever reported. He loved his owner and his owner adored him as well. In the end, he suffered arteriosclerosis, so his owner went to see him one last time, to which Alex told his owner, "You are good, I love you." She replied, "I love you too." He said, "I'll see you tomorrow," and she replied, "Yes, I'll see you tomorrow."